Hi everybody, welcome to the Big Liberty Show. Hello Sanbonani, hello, how's it? I have a very special guest for you guys, a very proudly South African guest, a very accomplished guest, someone who I'm sure you're looking right now and going, is that? Yes, it is. That is Helen Zille, who is joining us on the Big Liberty Show. Big announcement, as I had said last week on the Daily Friend Show. And that announcement is exactly this. Helen Zille will be joining us here at the IRR. But let me not waffle away. Let me say hi to all my guests who are in studio. First one being our most prominent one. Mum Helen, hello. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Big Daddy. It's really great to be with you. Thank
you.
It
is fantastic to have you with us. And we're joined, of course, by our very familiar face to all of you guys here, Mr. Gabriel Krauser. Gabriel, hello, hello. Gabriel, of course, is our writer and analyst, and he'll be joining us for this conversation as we delve into a few issues here. First of which, Helen, as I said, welcome to the IRR. But as most people will be wondering at home, what's Helen doing at the IRR?
Well, I'm going to be spending at least a year here, and I'm going to be doing a lot of writing, a lot of research, a lot of thinking. Hopefully I'll also write another book, and I'm going to do it on the political philosophy that binds open-minded Democrats, which is a fundamentally liberal political philosophy that's in trouble all over the world in many ways. And I'm going to be thinking about how those challenges apply to the South African context in particular, and I'm going to be trying to find out whether there's a way forward for us.
Absolutely. Now, Helen, the very interesting thing, which I have a feeling once this is out and we'll see social media go absolutely berserk, is what it is exactly to be a liberal. It's often a tainted term here in South Africa, but poorly understood. What do you understand to be a liberal and a classical liberal?
Well, by classical liberal, I understand a frame of mind that sees every individual as a person in their own right and doesn't generalize on the basis of preconceptions about the group that they happen to be associated with superficially. So freedom is a very central liberal idea, and freedom of the individual. Of course, individuals are free to belong to groups. In fact, most people find meaning and purpose in life through belonging to groups, but that freedom to associate with whom you wish is the liberal impulse. The second key thing about liberals is that they believe that the truth is out there, but it's very, very difficult to find, and that we can't necessarily find it, and that is why you've always got to be open-minded, listen to alternative points of view, and that is why we don't like ideologies per se that claim to have the truth and claim to be able to define how the world works. We keep searching for how the world works, and we keep searching to get closer to the truth in any situation, and that is why we believe so strongly in freedom of ideas, freedom of speech, freedom to think differently.
Again, I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate in this episode, because I can feel it coming through the screen, the sort of like, on the one hand, the gnashing of teeth, and on the other, perhaps, jubilation, because I think for a lot of South Africans, there is a desperate need right now to hear voices who are considered to be rational in a space where, public discourse is often a shouting match, not necessarily one based on facts, data, and reasoning. On that, let me ask a bit of I'll call it a personal question, but really, it's open to your interpretation, Helen. Why the IRR?
Well, the IRR is the clearest voice in South Africa today for classical liberalism. And there are different ways you can approach liberalism. There's social justice liberalism, there is what is called social liberalism, there is classical liberalism. But the bottom line is this: they're all linked to the classic idea of human freedom. And I don't think that social justice needs to be inimical to liberalism. I think that they're entirely compatible, because in fact many of us are liberals because we're pursuing social justice and freedom, which we don't believe that social justice can happen in an unfree context. So I think the IRR is a very clear voice, and I think we need to redefine the role of liberals in South Africa today. We're under enormous pressure, especially in this era of identity politics, especially in this era where we are in a post-truth society, as the term goes, where facts don't matter, where feelings are all important, and we've got to find a way to correct the balance.
Gabriel, I'm going to bring you in. We've been sort of chomping at the bit as an office, haven't we?
Yeah.
When we found out that, Helen's joining us, it's a super important thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's vital to the country in a way. It has been something to not talk about in a way because it's important and you don't want to leak it out. But I think there are really titanic shifts happening in South African politics. We've had an era, the Zuma era we can call it, the lost decade we can call it, where it looked like the ANC had lost the trajectory that I think decent South Africans had hoped it was on and had sometimes very good reason to see it on, and it veered away from that in a shocking way. And I can still remember the shock, I think partly because I was overseas, and then you come back and it's like a different country in so many ways. The way people talk, the way people relate to each other, the way they sort of relate to the news and to feelings and to reason and to different ideas and to difference itself was quite different after sort of a deep time into the Zuma era compared to before. Not to say it was perfect before, but something changed, and then came this opportunity for the ANC to right itself, and it failed to do that, in my opinion. And I think, and the DA looked like it would keep growing, and the DA failed to keep growing. And so I feel that South Africa seems a little bit like a ship that's sinking and doesn't have a rudder and doesn't have a sense of where to go. There's a lot of pulling in a lot of different directions, and none of them, or very few of them, seem to be based on hard reason. So in this time of uncertainty and of deep worry and of recession and flight of capital and massive youth unemployment, I think for an institute like the IRR that's been around for 90 years, that's been fighting the good fight, I think, for 90 years, of individual dignity, of freedom, libertas, as the core value, as the key principle and the kernels of a healthy society, to gain in its stable, South Africa's most prominent leader of opposition politics in the last decade and a half, and a feisty journalist before that, and a truth seeker, and an extraordinarily capable writer and persuader, and winner of the hearts and minds of ordinary citizens. I think we should consider ourselves lucky as the Institute, and proud, I'm proud to have a new colleague in Helen Zille.
Absolutely. Helen, Gabriel raises a few points here, which I want us to hash out just very briefly, because anybody watching it might also now be thinking, but hang on, whoa. The IRR seems to be racking up a lot of DA people. And there's something to be said in that, right? Because, I was in the DA, Gabriel not so much, or actually not at all, sorry.
Yeah.
Is there a clear blue line, if I may, between who we were or are in the DA and who you are here?
Well, in the DA, I was actuated by trying to give expression in a party political context to the ideas of liberalism.
Yes.
Now, it's very difficult in party politics to articulate a pure version of any ideology, because politics is the art of the possible in a very complex environment. And it's good to be able to step back and say, all things being equal, which they never are, how would we apply our political philosophy in this context? How would we interpret events through this lens? How would we, for example, to take something very topical, look at a commission of inquiry like the Zondo Commission of Inquiry and President Zuma's rights through the lens of the values that we believe in, due process, the rule of law, all of those sorts of things. So, in a sense, I was at the coalface applying theory to practice as far as was possible within the DA, and sometimes crossing lines that the IRR didn't like at all. And it's very important for me to be able to take a step backwards, having all this practical experience behind me, and look at the unfolding of events through the prism of the political philosophy that I still think holds the only true hope for South Africa. And that interaction between the world of practical politics and the world of theory is incredibly important to bridge and to interrogate. And so it makes a lot of sense for people from the IRR, and Gwen was one of them, to cross the bridge to be in practical politics, which is a very, very tough space. And then it's also ideal for me, who was in that arena, to take a step back and say, let me think about it. Let me try and write a book about applying our values in practice. Let us look at whether it's possible in a context like South Africa and why that matters. So all of these things are really important. Theory has to inform practice, practice has to inform theory, and it's that bridge that I think should exist.
Absolutely. As we look to the tail end of this conversation, and by the way, guys, relax. We are going to have Helen on the show, quite regularly, and hint, hint, she may actually have her own show at some point. But as we move towards the tail end of this conversation, Helen, there is a practical day-to-day, I suppose, to the question of what Helen Zille will be doing. And I've alluded to it. Of course, there may be a book in the offing. Not may, there will be a book in the offing. Can people expect written pieces by Helen Zille regularly? And just the short answer is yes, but I want Helen to just give us a sense of what exactly are some of the interest areas that you'll be writing. Obviously not an exhaustive list, but some of the interest areas that you'll be looking to write into.
Well, I'm still very much a journalist at heart, Sihle. Yep. And I can't read newspapers or do anything without thinking, man, that needs to be interrogated further. What about this question? What about that question? So I'd like to be writing myself about those issues, but I'd love to get back into interviewing people about them and pinning them to the wall, as it were, in asking those kinds of questions. And I think there is a space for those kinds of interviews. I know every person and their dog has a podcast, but I think podcasts are very powerful because people can listen to them in all kinds of circumstances.
Absolutely.
And if you can get a quick podcast out on a topical issue, it is always very, very useful to have some tough debate and to see things from a liberal perspective, which is not always the case. I mean, take the two examples currently. Commissions of inquiry. Do they bypass the institutions that liberals believe in? Do they undermine the criminal justice pipeline and therefore violate the rights of people who might potentially be the accused in a case down the road? That is President Zuma's case, and he might well have a point in a liberal philosophical framework. We need to talk about that.
Absolutely.
Because it's so easy out there to just say knee-jerk, Zuma is the baddie, he's talking nonsense. He may well not be from our perspective on this particular issue. And so I like to be able to interrogate these things and talk about them. Equally, on the DA at the moment, can we have our cake and eat it? Can we say, for example, the public protector is useless and doesn't understand the law, but yet take cases to her? And on the other hand, the question is, if the law says that if somebody in executive office violates the Executive Ethics Act, your only recourse is to the public protector, what do you do? So there are all these liberal dilemmas every single day that come up in the news. And I think that there's an appetite in South Africa for people to be discussing them, interrogating them. South Africans are seriously engaged and intelligent. I met last night, literally, and I have to tell the story, a car guard who recognized me on the beachfront and who sat down with me and had one of the most intelligent, insightful conversations that I've had for a very long time. And we could engage all of these issues. So the bottom line is that South Africa is ripe for these debates. And they're not getting them in the mainstream media.
And that's definitely what we're not here, mainstream media. Here we will, delve into ideas. We will delve into controversy, not for the sake of controversy in and of itself, but for the sake of the battle of ideas. And we talk a lot, Helen, about the battle of ideas and how South Africans need to get involved in it, because ultimately it's ideas that are guiding some of the decisions that are made by government, politicians, etc., etc. Maybe as final question and for final thoughts here, there's going to be an almost tectonic shift, I think, that will come by having skilled writers getting involved at the IRR. And Helen, we've begun as an institute to pioneer different ways of communicating ideas to various and different audiences. I mean, for example, the Big Liberty Show is one of those mediums. Gabriel has his own podcast, Two Crickets in a Thorn Tree.
That's right.
And
shout out to Helen Zille.
There you go. And of course, there are other shows, and I really meant this. I know we'll have a show with you. Maybe your final thoughts, Helen. There are young liberals right now whom are trying to be a part of the battle of ideas. And it's a very tough environment for them, because not only are they finding, for instance, and I will say this without a sense of pause, they're finding the environment within the DA, what should be a liberal, classically liberal party, and I'll use that liberal broadly. They're finding the environment in there quite hostile for them. And equally, the environment generally in society is quite, sort of leftist and trendy lefty, as I often say online. Talk to me about how we can inspire that young liberal chap who may be listening to the show, watching the show, thinking, oh, wow, Helen's with the IR. But what does that mean for him? Are we going to be pushing out the sort of arguments, the ideas that can empower them to be armed with the ideas and thoughts, if you will, to push back against the hegemony at the moment?
That's precisely the point. There are a lot of people who are instinctively liberal, but having the arguments is difficult, especially when you have the hegemony of feelings.
Yes.
You can't go against my lived experience, and I'm not interested in hearing your argument.
Yes.
And that makes it very, very difficult in a context where liberals like ideas, debate, and argument. So it's very important to marshal the arguments and to get them rational. But the point that I need to underline is liberals everywhere require an enormous amount of courage, because you're almost always swimming against the stream. And that is an uncomfortable place to be. If liberals are comfortable, they're doing something wrong. So the bottom line is that you've got to be uncomfortable, and very few people have the capacity to do that. I was watching a documentary on Einstein the other day, and I was totally blown away by the fact that Einstein's own equations showed him that the universe was expanding. But because there was such a dominant understanding in the scientific community that it was at equilibrium and in a constant state, he could not dare to say that his equations were showing something different. And he had to invent this thing called lambda. I don't know if you know this thing.
Cosmological constant.
That's right. He had to invent the cosmological constant to stick it in his equation so that he could prove his own equation wrong, because it was too revolutionary. And it went too much against the grain. And this unknown Jesuit priest called Lemaitre came along and said, but your equation shows that the universe is expanding. And Einstein, it was somewhere in France, said, abominable, or abominable. That's my pronunciation in French of abominable, because he could not bring himself to admit that how revolutionary his theory of relativity was.
Gabriel, I'm going to pose a different question to you as a final thought. We've been trying to raise very serious issues. And Helen, I might come back to you on this one also, sorry. We've been trying to raise very serious issues here at the IRR that affect the standard of living of ordinary South Africans, including being a voice for that South African who doesn't write into the weekend papers and gets their opinion pieces out, or letters to the editor, or even access to the traditional media. How important is it for us to be a institute that is manned, if you will, and I know the feminists are going to kill me, but an institute that houses, see what I did there, individuals who are able to articulate ideas very clearly and concisely, and have fellow colleagues, those of us, like France and me, who drive to every single corner of this country to then share those ideas. So how important is it to have thought leaders in an institute in a time where thought is seen as heresy?
Yeah, I don't think you can put a number on it. I think it's very deeply important. I think it's very deep, actually. I remember speaking to France when he was planning the first sort of go out there and get the talks going, these sort of civilian town halls where people can gather together and discuss liberal ideas and see how they can take their lives into their own hands. And he thought, he asked me the question, when last do you think this was happening outside of a political party in this country? And I couldn't think of a good answer. I mean, maybe as far back as OB days, way back when. It's a very important moment that we're living in. And how does it affect the political arena? Well, the more our surveys show time and time again that there are two different universes. There's South Africa, the way most South Africans think, a lot of decency, a lot of good values, a lot of respect for individuality, for hard work, for merit. A lot of impatience for the thought that it's all about race and it's all about decolonizing this country. And yet you've got a mediascape. You've got this bubble inside of which all kinds of concoctions can be made and fumigate and intoxicate those who sniff on it into believing that they see the God-ordained truth and be damned the common citizens. So the more we can have prominent voices, the more we can have charismatic people going out there and piercing that bubble and exploding that fog and mist, the more ordinary South Africans get to see that they are not alone in wanting something better, in knowing a good route to getting something better. And that, I think, applies pressure on our politics, which is a key thing to do.
As I said, Helen, I'll give you the final word. And I want you to shape it in the context of, here I am, Helen Zille, I'm at the IRR. This is what I want to achieve in my time here. What would that be?
What I want to achieve is to help inform the struggle for freedom in our country at this time. It is a very, very difficult time. But liberals have never had it easy. The people who wanted liberty, equality, fraternity in the French Revolution didn't expect a Robespierre at the end of it. The people who fought for freedom against the Nazis didn't expect decades of oppression under Soviet authoritarianism. Liberals have also always had it tough. And you've got to analyze the space that you're in. We're in South Africa. We've got an incredible amount of potential, which is important not only for ourselves, but literally for the world as it becomes more and more diverse and plural and culturally heterogeneous. And we've got a lot to help show the world if we can get it right here. So I know that sounds rather grand, but I love doing what I can where I am with what I have. And at the moment, I've got the experience and the passion to apply these ideas to making progress in our country, and hopefully that will contribute to the world.
Absolutely. Well, Helen, we are the richer for having you here, and we do welcome you to the IRR. I'm super excited, of course, to work with you, and we'll have you on the Big Liberty Show, on the Daily Friend, and of course on your show. But again, a warm, warm welcome to you from us at the IRR. And a warm thank you. And I keep saying warm, it's frigid in here.
It's not at all, it's damn boiling hot here.
A big thank you to the viewer, the supporter of the IRR. Here we have Helen Zille, one of the most important voices of our time in this country, joining the IRR. And I'm encouraging you to do the same. You can join the IRR and support our work here by becoming a friend of the IRR. That's our crowdfunding campaign that allows us to be able to afford to put out the content, the quality content that you are getting to enjoy consuming. And you can become a friend of the IRR, of course, by SMSing your name to 32823. An SMS will cost you R1. Terms and conditions to apply. But hey, maybe you don't like SMSs. You're thinking, nope, I'm new school. I do everything online. Well, find us online at irr.org.za/join. And you can sign up a monthly debit order of between 70 and 90 Rand. It is those funds that get us into the fight. It is those funds that see people like France Cronier and other colleagues and me traveling this country, coming to your community and speaking to you about the ideas that matter to you. And of course, it's those ideas that help my colleagues put out quality content on the Daily Friend website. Remember, that website is www.dailyfriend.co.za. But let me not waffle on. Let me say thank you to my guests and welcome once again to Helen Zille. And thank you, the viewer. I will see you on the next episode of The Big Liberty Show.